listening to The Starting Zone, a podcast about World of Warcraft and the people who play it. And now, here are your hosts.
Well, hello and welcome to The Starting Zone, the podcast about World of Warcraft, the people who play it. Today is July 1st, 2024. That's right, it's Canada Day, and my name is Spencer Downey. Thank you so much for listening and subscribing to the podcast. I'm joined today, as always, by my co-host Jason Lucas. Jason, how are you doing on this fine Monday?
Spencer, hello, and happy Canada Day to you and to all
Thank
of our
you.
listeners in Canada. We have many, many friends and listeners in the Great White North. So, and it is officially July, which means that expansion officially comes out next month.
It's true.
That feels really weird to say, but it's true. It's a fact, whether you can handle it or not, which is really exciting. We're getting into the home stretch here with pre-patch and all that stuff. We're probably in the last couple weeks here of 10.x, which is, I can't quite wrap my brain around how fast this is all gone, but we're, it's coming whether we're ready for it or not.
Yeah, it is. It certainly is. It also means that there's a new trading post that we get to talk about today, which is always nice to do because there's some fun things in there. And we also have like multiple versions of World of Warcraft to talk about. So there's a lot going on. We have, we'll start off obviously live game. We'll then move into what's going on with some War Within stuff. And then we got pre-patch stuff. And then we got obviously SOD because we know that the Season Discovery launch is set. So we're going to be seeing that very soon for Season 4 of Season of Discovery, Phase 4. And there's a lot going on. So we got a big show to talk about. So before we do, what did you get up to this past week in World of Warcraft, Jason? How are you prepping?
It was a pretty busy week. I did miss Sunday night, so we only had a couple nights of raiding, and it is starting to get a little bit tricky to really rally the troops for raids in general, but for remix raids, weirdly, you think that'd be the thing people would be more interested in, but
Right.
The people among us who really got the sweatiest are like already completely done. So they're like, well, I guess I don't know, maybe I'll come, but probably not because they don't even need anything from bronze anymore. But we did get into
So you're saying they need a bronze to gold conversion rate at some bizarro thing, so that those people have a reason to continue playing, so they can get 100,000 bronze and convert it into 10,000 gold or something.
Yeah, some kind of cash out for bronze would actually maybe be cool. But we got into some Awakened raiding. It was a vault week. We only had time for first 2 Mythic and Heroic full clear, but it was fine. It was smooth. Like a Heroic Awakened raiding is pretty easy at this point once you're 525 plus item level with really optimized weapons and trinkets and other items. So it's fine, but it was nice we had enough people to at least do some Mythic, but we didn't quite have a chance to get I think we had time for like 1 pull on Taros, and Taros is a little bit of a punishing boss if you don't do it exactly right. So it was not one-shottable, and then we ran out of time. Did a ton of keystones early in the week. I think I did like 6 keystones on Tuesday. Just did a couple 10s, did that, but then filling up the vault with +8s. There was a marked difference of like, okay, let's try a 10, and then it has Spiteful, and you're like, I hate Spiteful, and then you do an 8, and then there is nothing, and everything's tuned way lower, and you just kind of blast through it. I don't know, I might really be running out of steam here for Mythic Plus this season. It's just, people are really checked out. This week it felt really palpable that it's just like people are kind of done, which is fine. I don't think we have much left to accomplish, right?
We're right at the end of the season, so as you said, we could be, depending on when we actually see pre-patch drop, we could be 2 weeks from that happening. So yeah, it's not from necessarily season wrap up, but from pre-patch dropping, and is what we're 2 weeks away from, I think. So yeah, it's happening soon. We are seeing the end of that soon. People's whole entire point of doing Mythic Plus is to have fun with your friends, first and foremost, hopefully, and then gearing, right? And it's just like, well, is there really that much purpose in gearing when we're about to make all of the gear in World of Warcraft relevant? Not really. So outside of that, it's just people trying to get their 20s done, get their portals, get whatever. Well, I'll say 20s, but you know what I mean. Trying to get their portals, trying to get all that stuff.
It's 10s now.
It's 10s, yeah.
It was half. It was 20s for half.
My brain was still doing the last patch thing. It's fine.
the first half of this expansion was 20s. Now it's 10. So yeah. So I don't know. I have to try to shift my own mindset and like not put any pressure on myself if I don't have an opportunity to play with people that I want to play with and fill up my vault this coming week. So be it. And that's a bit of that's tricky for me because I see that stuff and I'm like, okay, I need X number of more keys and I want to get this many, whatever.
Sure.
There's one item I'm fishing for out of the Great Vault that would be a nice little side grade. That's it. Otherwise I'm taking, tokens. So I don't know why I even care, but it's a mindset thing. We did blast a full heroic remix raid tour on Wednesday night, which was fun. That's like, I don't know, that's in excess of like 90k bronze or something just right there, just doing those raids and clearing them out on heroic. So I have the toy vendor totally bought out. Check that off the list. I'm working on the mount vendor now. I got all the cheap mounts on the mount vendor. I got like the mount vendor is like 5 pages, and I have 3 of those pages completely done. And one of the pages just has 3 mounts on it, 2 of which I already had coming into the event anyway. So it's I need about I call it 250k bronze to finish off the mount vendor, which is not as much as it sounds like, and especially if this week I get in a couple heroic world tours on Wednesday, Sunday, whatever. That could end up just being the end of that vendor for me. And then, then I'm picking through transmog appearances and stuff. I bought the Dark Shamans sets, all 3 of them this week. That was another thing I wanted to check off the list before the event ended because they're pretty cool and unique to it. So, just look, I haven't been doing everything in Remix every day, but I try to get in there and do my LFR wing and my, scenario and dungeon on normal and heroic, get the daily quest done and just get that big bronze for that like half-hour time investment. If I get the threads, I get them, doing the world bosses and stuff, but the power is kind of irrelevant at this point anyway. And outside of that, I actually I got the shaman going this week. I ended up leveling shaman from 60 to 70, I think, since we spoke last. Played enhancement, which I didn't love, but it was okay. I started getting a bit into it, once I started getting towards the end of the process. Did a lot of time walking dungeons, which honestly I didn't love. I know I always kind of put time walking over as like a great way to level tunes, and it can be, but I wasn't really clicking with the enhancement shaman. And when you're not tanking, it's like you're sitting in time walking queues and you're not driving the boat, you know what I mean? Like you're at the mercy of somebody else. So I didn't like it as much as maybe other tunes I've done, or even the hunter. The hunter I did with a lot of time walking, and it's like, well, I'm just right clicking on stuff, and my pets are killing it, and I don't need to keep up with the tank or like figure out what the tank's doing with positioning because I'm back here shooting. So,
well, I'd also emphasize that if the goal was to level, you have time running right now, which is substantially better than time walking when it comes to leveling.
Yeah, sort of. If you had a fresh tune that you had and you have no connection to anything, like my shaman is a character that I've had since Burning Crusade,
well, yeah,
maybe Wrath of the Lich King.
The character into time running. I get that.
Right, yeah. It's just like it's a character that I like and I'm invested in, and I want to take her into the next expansion. I don't want to make a new character, and I'm already at level 60. You know what I mean? So, I unfortunately don't feel like I benefit very much from the time running leveling option because I don't want to level new characters through it. I have my stable of characters that I like and that I've had for a long time. So I'm trying to I have the Priest and Warlock left, and I'll have all 13 classes at 70. I would sort of like to have them done before pre-patch. If the data on the test realms holds up, like we're going to see a massive, hugely steep drop in XP requirements to level, which is like to the point where it's like better than any kind of XP holiday they'd be doing anyway. If they're not done before then, they'll be done very quickly after that. And then I'm thinking, if we get that XP reduction, and then it's time for, allied races and horde tunes and other stuff that got abandoned at like level 50 because I didn't want to go back through Shadowlands, 20 times. Imagine that. So, I'm starting to shift into that mode of like let's get the stable sort of ready to go, especially because I think delves and warbands and all that is going to make playing all so much more fun for somebody like me in War Within. So, just keeping an eye on that, keeping some momentum there, and Still doing a Hoon every day. I don't have the Drake armor yet. I like the fact that I only have to do it once a day, but if I don't have a thing by Friday, man, I'm gonna be pretty bummed because you feel like if you do it every day, right, and you have
Yeah.
the increased chance and the
Yeah.
bad luck protection, and you do it for 14 days in a row, you feel like you should walk away with the event, run the event with it. So hopefully,
Yeah.
we'll see next week.
I also agree. I think it's a little bizarre that you haven't managed to accomplish it yet if you've been doing it every day, given they literally did a post explaining that there's this new updated loot system and the first boss on a kill on every account increases your chance to get the drop the next time around and this whole thing. And you're like, great, you've put in a bad luck protection, which means you'd think that bad luck protection percentage would be high enough that if you did the event through the entire event, you would actually get the thing you wanted because that's more than 10 days, right? Is what you'd sort of figure inside this case, but I guess not with this one. So we'll see. Yeah, hopefully you get it. I think that makes sense.
Thanks. I mean, if it's not the end of the world if I don't get it, but it's the kind of thing where you feel like you put the time into it. You have that increasing chance. It just feels bad. I mean, I don't think it feels worse than like having no increasing chance like we had before, where it's like we have one good chance a day and then a bunch of really bad chances if you want to spend the time. Like, that felt awful because it's like, okay, I guess I'm not doing anything else anyway, so let's put another alt in the queue. And there's just no light at the end of that tunnel, and so these changes will make it so it's not like that. But the question will be, does your streak protection reset every time the event rolls back around, or does it just increase forever until you get it? Because if it's the latter, then it's a great system because eventually you'll get everything, as long as you log in when that holiday comes around and participate in it, then you will get it at some point, but maybe not in the first year it's introduced.
Yeah. Anyways, hopefully that gets resolved and you get yourself a mount and we find out. The obscurity of the system is one of the frustrating things. If you're going to put a bad luck protection system in place, I'd love it if they gave us a number. Every time you kill the boss, you gain a 0.5% chance of getting the mount drop. Is very different from every time you kill the boss, you get an 8% chance of getting the drop. You're like, oh, okay, one of those makes a big difference. And the other one's like, that's great that I am now up after 1 year of doing it to a 5% chance of seeing this, but that's not great overall when it comes to an event. So yeah, hopefully that works out for you and you get it, and hopefully other people aren't struggling with the same thing, but we will have to wait and see as to what you manage to accomplish in the next few days. Is there anything else you want to cover before we hop into what's going on this week?
That is what has been keeping me busy around WoW for sure.
Sounds good. Let's hop into what's going on this week in World of Warcraft. All right, this week in World of Warcraft is the Arena Skirmish bonus event, where honor gains from Arena Skirmishes are increased by 50% with a quest to win 10, granting you some conquest and honor. There's also the Pet Battle bonus event going on at the moment, where the Sign of the Critter buff is up, increasing Pet Battle experience gained from battles by 100%, as well as a quest to win 5 PvP Pet Battles to win an Ultimate Pet Battle Training Stone, which instantly levels any pet to level 25. So if that's something you're looking to do, either of those two things, that's what's up this week. We also have the last hurrah going on for Zeralik Caverns, which means you have to protect the researchers, secure a shipment, and complete a time rift. And paired with this, as you would expect, it means that the Zakali Elders will be our world boss for the week that is awakened, getting you that extra juicy chunk of loot at 499 eye level, in case you're looking for something like that. The PvP brawl for the week is Temple of Hot Magoo, where we have modified rules for Temple of Kot Magoo. Basically, you can now throw the orb to another friendly player if that's something you're wanting to do, but they also gain the debuffs along with the orb, so have fun getting up to 10 stacks or 6 stacks and throwing the orb to a friend who then becomes the target for everyone, trying to knock them down. And this is a very fast-paced match. This has the reduced resurrection timer down to 5 seconds, so it's certainly something where people just have a good time, and it's a blitz, and it's a lot of honor, and it's a lot of fun. And if you can get some friends together, it is one of my favorite brawls to do. So certainly check out some Temple of Hot Magoo.
Yeah, it's a nice one. Yeah, very fast paced. Everybody's in combat all the time, with the res timers, and it is pretty funny if you build up that hot potato and throw it to somebody and they just kind of explode.
They just pop.
Yeah. This is another one of those really fast-paced, up-tempo brawls, short games, etc. It's one of those kinds of weeks. So, it's kind of a cool one. I think it's one of the a familiar BG, but we changed the rules up a bit. But I think it's one of the better examples of that. I like the ones generally. I like the brawls that are a little more out of left field. Doing something really different or having basically like a different mode that you're playing. But I think this is one of the better rule change ones. It mixes up the gameplay enough that still feels like Temple, but it's it's just like cranked all the way up. So yeah, it's cool. I'll take it over something like Gravity Labs.
Yeah, the reduced res timer on this really is what to me makes it sing, because so often on this map, when you're not inside of a brawl mode like this, if you die and you are put on the opposite side of the arena from your team who is moving in a circle around the arena with the orb, you are going to have a very difficult time getting back to your team, because most likely you have to pass through several enemies, which are just going to destroy you before you get there. With a 5-second res timer, you're back so quickly that you essentially are just hopping right back into the battle, which feels really good. So that nonstop action, I think, is part of what really hooks me into this for sure. Mythic Plus affixes for the week. We have Tyrannical, Storming, and Raging, meaning bosses have 30% more health and deal increased damage, as well as, while in combat, enemies periodically summon damaging whirlwinds, and non-boss enemies enrage at 30% health remaining, temporarily granting immunity to crowd control effects. So, I mean, this is actually probably one of your best Tyrannical weeks you're going to see, and we're getting close to wrapping up the season, so take advantage of this. Storming is almost a non-issue when it comes to bosses. There's very few bosses where there's hey, you need to get out of something or stand in something, and a storming tornado might cause the issue of dealing more damage to you and sort of disrupting you a bit. Your tank can typically soak these as long as your healer is putting out the throughput they need to. Yes, on a Tyrannical boss, your tank is probably taking heavier hits and more damage, so it could be a little dangerous to be soaking all of the stormings and whatnot that are happening at the same time, but as long as you're paying attention to it, it's almost a non-affix for a lot of players, because it's just about dodging. Raging doesn't affect bosses at all, so it really doesn't affect Tyrannical in any way, shape, or form, which means that your trash is going to be the thing that slows you down a little bit more this week, but not a lot, because as long as you're focusing down mobs once they drop below 30% health remaining, or you're using something like a Soothe to get rid of that raging effect, then you're fine. You can soothe that off of them, and then you can interrupt or stun or do whatever you need to do as far as these mobs go. And man, you can have yourself a good time this week for Tyrannical.
Yeah, I think this is a great Tyrannical combo for sure. I think we are now around to the point where this was the affix we had the first week of the season. So we've now seen like a full rotation in season 4, and this is week 11, I think, if my math is remotely correct.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that was I don't like starting a season with Tyrannical, but I think it worked out. It set the stage for season 4, where it was like, okay, this is, this feels like a season 4. We feel strong. We know what to do. But yeah, it's a really good combo. Storming is, it is not too big of a deal, especially if you're not in melee or you don't need to be in a particular spot at any point in time. There is like one really terrible storming interaction that I don't like in this dungeon pool, which is in Algathar Academy. There's that one big wind elemental thing that you fight before you go to Bird Boss, and it dropped a bunch of tornadoes around itself, and they hurt really bad, and it's hard to distinguish them from the storming tornadoes, and then you're like trying to dodge so many tornadoes and then get out of this thing's LOS when it does its big, expel cast and all that. But, it's also Tyrannical week, so the death winds from that thing aren't even going to be as bad. But that is the one place where I've been like, whoa, actually storming sucks right here, this season. That's the one I've had where it's like, oh yeah. But I don't think it's an issue this week.
That sounds very familiar to the, like, back in the day Karazhan with Volcanic, and you couldn't see the Volcanic underneath the carpets inside Karazhan. It's kind of
like that.
It's like it's camouflage.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Or like what was it? Was it last season? Or was it season 2? We had Vortex Pinnacle in the pool, and then it's like, hey, I hope you like tornadoes, because you're just going to be looking at tornadoes for the next half hour.
Yeah.
It definitely it can be disruptive, but it's not that big of a deal. And raging, on non-fort week, another great thing about it is like they have so much less health. Yeah. So yes, they're enraged, but like if you can't dispel it, and if you can't kick them, just turn on them and blow them up, and they'll die. Exactly. And then they're not doing any damage at all. So, yeah, really good combo if you need Tyrannical points. If you're trying to make some, late season push for KSM or KSH or something. Trying to get. I think this is a great week for unlocking the teleports.
Yeah.
If you're still working on that. Yes, like the typical caveats apply with tyrannical weeks because the bosses are going to be a bigger hurdle. But if your boss execution is on point, then this week is pretty straightforward. So I'm hoping that people I know want to do some because I would like to get in here and do some. But you know what? Again, like it's a mindset shift for me. I got to start getting into pre-expansion mode, and like if season 4 stuff is going to drop off among my group, then it just is. It doesn't mean that we're not going to be back, slamming season 1 when it comes out, right? Like it's just that's. But I don't know. I sort of I'm always just kind of in the moment with stuff, and it's summertime and people are doing stuff that isn't World of Warcraft and this isn't new content. If I get in here and smash out 8 of these this week, I'll feel great and it'll be really fun. And if I don't, then it's really not going to matter in the grand scheme of the universe.
Yeah, it really won't. All right, Midsummer Fire Festival is ending this Friday, so be sure you're taking advantage while you can. That's July 5th that wraps up. This is just making sure you get, as Jason talked about, your Cliffside Wilder Drake armor, as well as the new Midsummer Safeguard, which is a shield slot MOG item, and then the Mantle of the the Mantle of Midsummer, which is the back that you can get for 350 as well. So getting those knocked out is certainly something that's worthwhile doing. Also, remember, if this is something you have not been participating in very much, you can now. It's July, right? So you got your traveler's log. You can get out there and be sure you're getting all your traveler's log points, and make sure that you're finishing that all up as much as you can before the event ends. The actual traveler's log will have the amount of time remaining on those particular tasks. So if you have a certain amount of time remaining on anything, like if it's happens to be the week where we have Dark Moon Fair, which guess what, it's coming up soon, then it's going to be one of those things where you can actually get a bunch of points during that limited time event to finish up your traveler's log. And if you're someone who's like, hey, it's summertime, I want to be outside, I want to be on my computer, I don't play the game that much, this is a great way to sort of hit those like key things. Get in there and go over to your opposite faction and desecrate their flame. That gets you like almost 100 points or something like that. And then you can do the same thing of getting out and dancing inside the Obsidian Throne with one of the dancing braziers. That gets you a bunch of points. And there's a lot of like really easy, really fast things you can sort of knock out to get some travelers log stuff points if you haven't yet, because we'll talk about the rewards that are coming up later in the show as well. Jason, is there anything you want to mention about Midsummer?
No, not really. I mean, other than just, keep in mind it's almost over. It doesn't end at reset on Friday, but it ends like a couple hours after reset. So you will have a little bit of time on Friday for one last gasp if you can play like during the day. So, I mean, that will get you another shot at a Hoon or whatever, if you can get in there right after reset. But yeah, one thing I will say, like, this was sort of part of the impetus of me going, let's get that shaman going and let's get done here. I have memories of the Midsummer Fire Fest feeling like this great leveling bonanza,
because
back in like vanilla.
Because every flame you honored gave you experience, and you're like, great. So just literally get the run around the little, maypole and get all of the extra experience you can as you like twirl. It's a very cool effect. Do all the dailies, like catching all the torches and everything. And then you just went around and honored every flame you possibly could. And you got a lot of levels. It was a great leveling experience for sure.
Yeah, and then, the amount of like mobs you would be grinding on to level up in the olden days, right? Like you'd get so much mileage out of that 10% buff from killing stuff. So in my head, I have it like, oh, it's a good idea to play some alts because it's Midsummer Fire Fest. Mm-hmm. The benefit is like, it feels so minor at this point.
It does.
All your XP's coming from the end of dungeon queue or whatever bonuses that you're getting from doing match-made stuff. It's from the big chunks of quest XP that come in, you do get XP from doing the honoring the flame quests. That does give you XP, but not very much compared to other stuff you could be doing. So I don't know. Like I don't regret having the shaman leveled. I'm glad that I did it. I enjoyed the process, and I look forward to maybe checking out some other stuff with that tune as we get, into the next expansion. But there was no urgency. It wasn't like midsummer's the time to do this. It really just didn't even matter. So
Yeah, they probably could revisit a lot of that with the holiday events. So going, all right, what's the amount of experience we give out for current quests inside of Dragonflight? Like what's that amount of experience that you get for completing a quest, and what's the amount of experience you get from honoring a flame? We should just tie those all together, because that will then make it feel really rewarding to go around and honor all these flames, because you're essentially taking as much time without having to focus on it. Because the nicest thing about honoring the flames is you can kind of just like flight path your way over there while you're doing laundry or something, and turn in onto those flames and get those quests done, and essentially be doing like a Dragonflight level quest and getting that quest reward. So it's probably just something that's sort of fallen off over a period of time, and they need to just revisit it and get that all tuned up the way it should be. Along with Midsummer Fire Fest, July 4th, for all you Americanos out there in the US, they actually have the fireworks display taking place, as they usually do, which means you can visit any capital city or Booty Bay and watch the big fireworks display that's going to take place. I think it's hourly. Yeah, it's hourly that this takes place, where you can pop in and watch that. So after the sun sets, and you can celebrate the end of Midsummer Fire Festival with the 4th of July. So enjoy that. And I'm sure there'll be
Booty
lots
Bay,
of
of course, is BIS. Got to go to Booty Bay for this if you want to watch fireworks. You can
Goblins, no
you
explosions,
want,
man. Goblins, no explosions.
yeah, right. Yeah, that's and now it's like not even really a pain to get there, because you can just drag and ride. So, hooray!
True. Darkmoon Fair, as I mentioned earlier, kicking off on the 7th, going to the 13th. So be sure that you're taking advantage of Darkmoon Fair with the reputation and experience buff. Get your profession skill ups if there's something you're still trying to just get to the very end and you want to wrap up that entire UI. Remember, none of that's carrying over to the next expansion. If you are someone who's like, oh, I got to get this done, you're doing it for completion at this point, or for an achievement or something like that you're trying to accomplish. You're not doing it for anything that has to do with next expansion. Also, the races that take place there, as well as taking advantage of the mini games that exist and the achievements that you can earn with all that stuff, and the tokens you can earn towards your dirigible, if that's something you're wanting to buy mount-wise. I'm looking forward to the dirigible having dynamic flight and seeing what that's like, because a bobbing and weaving Zeppelin sounds amazing to me to be riding around on. So,
that is cool. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. Yeah, that's a nice addition.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. So we will see what happens down the line with all the mounts getting converted over. I think we have 123 mounts or something like that they're coming out with at the pre-patch, going over to dynamic flight. So I'll have to see what happens with that and which ones are chosen. Now, July Trading Post. This has popped up, and you can get yourself a little baby Naga, sort of like corrupted Naga with a third eye little pet. If that's something you're looking for.
It's like a little baby Ashara, basically, is what she looks like.
Sort of, yeah.
I would say, yeah. Like, it's, if you could somehow picture like Naga Queen Ashara, but like a cute baby version of it, that's kind of what it is.
A little bit.
It's hard to picture when I put it that way, I guess. But yeah, super cool bonus reward for a pet, I think.
Yeah. There's also the Crimson Glimmer Fur, which is that fox mount that came out back in Legion that a lot of people really liked. That has shown up in the shop, as well as the Underlight Corrupted Behemoth. This is like a mutated, corrupted lionfish that you can sort of ride around on. So it's that old behemoth model that people might remember if they've ever fought one. But if you haven't, sort of like a strange, stretched out lionfish. Then there's Blub, which is a goldfish inside of a floating bubble of water that can follow you around if you're looking to get Blub for a pet as well. Now, they did 2 diving sets. One of them is an ensemble. It's 800 tokens to get it. And you essentially have a whole little like diving suit with like a backpack for air and everything else that you can wear. And it's a little bit darker in color as far as that ensemble goes. But then there's also the Copper Divers set. And this is broken up into separate individual pieces. And if you choose to buy the Copper Diver set, it's actually 860 currency, not 800 currency. So just be aware of the difference in pricing there. If you're starting to buy down that line, be sure you have enough currency to finish the set. If you don't, then maybe the ensemble's for you. Have to figure that one out for yourself. There's some other neat things in here too. Overall, I didn't think this was like the most amazing week for things, but there is a like Deep Sea Treasure Pack, which is a backpack you can wear that's sort of an open clam that has like a snow globe inside of it, basically for underwater scene with like a Naga statue and some other stuff inside of it. So if you've wanted to carry around an aquarium on your back, that's basically what this is. and it's a pretty cool one as well. That's worth checking out for people. That was a guaranteed pickup for me. I'm now debating which diving set I might want. I probably don't want both of them. The ensemble is tempting because it is a bit of a darker set, but that lighter gold and lighter tan kind of fabric of the copper one is also very attractive because it stands out more. So I don't know. I'm going back and forth between those two sets. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'll have to see what they look like in game and really go from there. There was not much that jumped out at me like, oh, this is a day one purchase for sure. This is super like, underwater themed for July, and I've been playing this game so long that the way my brain kind of works is that I divide my like memories and the way time flows based on like what was happening in World of Warcraft. And
Water wasn't a good memory.
July, summertime, like that was 8.2, right? Which was Nazjatar and BFA.
Yep.
And that's when a lot of like Naga and underwater stuff came in.
Yep.
So that this stuff is like very much on that theme. So I think it's theming that makes sense for this time of year. I'll just have to see like the preview blog. I haven't logged into the game today to look. I mean, we are now in July trading post. Like we're here as of reset today, a couple hours ago as we're recording. But I didn't log in and like look at the stuff. And the previews they posted, like there's not a lot of examples of some of the weapons and whatnot. And sometimes if a weapon, like a cheap weapon, I'll be like, okay, yeah, whatever, 80 tender, sure, I'll get it just to like have another option that I may or may not ever use. But the headline stuff is not speaking to me this month, I don't think.
Yeah, the treasure pack to me was the buy on site because it's so unique and so neat that I was
super
like,
unique. It doesn't really look like anything else.
Yeah, there's you're not going to find another clam shaped aquarium that you can carry around with you. So it just feels like, oh, I got to have that because I just need that in my bag of tricks if I ever want to put together a transmog. And this is one of those things, just like a diving suit. I'm like, man, if we ever get another underwater raid like Nazjatar, I'm gonna want to put on a diving suit for my transmog for that entire raid. It'll be very cool to do, right? Like. That to me is kind of a neat concept. So I definitely am leaning that direction. It's interesting. The picture they posted here of the Deepest Depths diving suit, which is the ensemble you can buy, is very like red and green inside of this shot. I think that's literally the lighting, because when I looked at it inside of my character inspect, it was like much darker in color, and the bodysuit was green, but it was a much deeper green. Everything was much sort of darker and gloomier. And I think that it reminded me very much of some of the stuff that we saw in BFA around the human area. It reminded me a lot of that sort of coloring. So it's interesting to see it this bright and orange and shine that way, because that's not what it looks like inside of the shop. So I feel like this is a, hey, you're watching the sunset inside of your diving suit kind of screenshot that was taken for this.
I mean, it's on the coastline there, and it definitely has that kind of feel in the picture they posted.
Yeah. But as far as the weapons and stuff go, nothing really grabbed me. The Riptide Gut Puncher, the fist weapon that they put in, does like have eyeballs on it that blink and roll around and look at stuff, and tendrils that sort of go up your arm and touch your arm, and like the claws on the end of it, or teeth, I guess they're supposed to be teeth on the end of it, sort of move and twist and grip. So it's a cool looking thing. It's got a lot of movement to it. I don't personally have a transmog that I'd ever want it to go with, but it's cool. So maybe there's someone out there who wants to grab it.
One of my rogue buddies always likes to use the grossest, weirdest looking fist weapons he possibly can in any situation. His go-to weapon transmog is like, there's like the dead fish that you like beat people with.
Yep.
And that's usually what he uses, but sometimes he'll mix in like a particularly weird or gross, fist weapon. So this might fit in with that kind of motif.
It might. Both it and the Titan Thunderbow are very large, which actually might have been something that sort of turned me off of the look of them a little bit. Is like the bow itself is huge. It's like character size bow. And then similarly, this fist weapon is like the size of your torso that you're putting on your arm. So it might just be that the size comparison for me stood out so much more that I was less sold on it. But yeah, I would certainly say if you are someone who's like, hey, none of this really is particularly attractive to me, maybe this is just to save my tender month. I would still probably put in the effort to try and get Trishi, the little pet that you can get that's got the 3 eyes, and it's very cute little noggling. So certainly worth picking up for sure as far as that stuff goes. Okay, the affix system is getting some revamps in War Within. We're moving into War Within stuff here, folks, so just stay with me.
And you are not listening to a rerun from 2 weeks ago.
No, we are posting the update that this is why talking about anything coming up that's in beta at the moment can be a little frustrating for people on shows like this, because we get a big blog post and we're like, oh, great, this is the new system. This is what we're going to be looking at. And then they're like, hey, we threw out that entire idea. Here's something totally different. That's what this is. War Within Apex system has gotten a totally new system. They are getting rid of Sanguine, Bolstering, Raging, and Bursting, which is what they were keeping last week. They're also getting rid of Reckless, Focused, Attuned, and Thorned, which we had some feedback for last week. And here's the new system. All right. Basically, at +2, Xalatath begins appearing inside of the dungeons for you. And you get Xalatath's Bargain, which essentially are affixes that appear on a weekly basis. And so the bargains are Ascendant and Frenzied. The Ascendant one is that Xalatath rains down orbs of cosmic energy that attempts to empower nearby enemies, increasing their haste and movement speed. If players disrupt these orbs, they claim this effect for themselves. So yes, this is Mythic Plus dungeons with more haste and movement speed. It sounds amazing. So be sure that you are disrupting these orbs for this affix. I think that could be a lot of fun for folks. And Frenzied is non-boss enemies become frenzied at 30% health remaining. That sounds really familiar, right? They just got rid of Raging, but what's this? So what happens when they get below 30% health is their haste is increased by 40%. That's important to note. It's haste that's increased, which means their auto attacks go faster, their ability casts go faster, and their spells go faster. It is going to be intense when you get below that 30%, and it's frenzied, and I don't know if this is something that is technically an enrage effect that you can soothe or not, so we'll have to find that out. But they also take 20% increased damage, which means as your trash pack gets lower, it becomes really dangerous for a period of time, and then you just blow it up and it dies. This is very similar to what Raging used to be ages ago, where when stuff went below 30% health, it did increase damage for that period of time. And so you basically had to like brace yourself as a tank. The difference here is it's going to be hitting you very quickly and casting its spells very quickly. So I think this is where you're going to see your big AoE stuns and everything start get layered in on these pulls. You'll see people pulling a lot of mobs, DPSing them down. Everything will start to get around to that 30% at the same point. There'll be a big stun that goes out. And then all those mobs take 20% increased damage while they're stunned, basically, because they'll drop below 30% health. And you'll blow up that pack. And it'll be very satisfying. I think that's sort of what we're looking at for the +2s. All right, Jason, focusing on the bargains for the +2s and above, what are you feeling on these two?
I feel okay about them. I think the theming and having like Xalatath be involved is cool, and we've had some cool flavor with that in previous expansions around the seasonal affix, where it's like, oh, one of the big bads or whatever is like inserting themselves into the dungeon as well. I like that flavor. I don't know about the stuff that makes your character play different inside the dungeon. You know, this is a thing that a lot of players want, right? They want like the cooldown reduction buffs or like haste buffs or whatever. And, you know, they have been like actively campaigning for stuff like this to be the seasonal affix or whatever happens in Mythic Plus. You know, we had that, Shadowlands Season 4, we had the thing where you kill the Dreadlords and then you got like a mega stat buff of your choice. And we've had other stuff too where, you know, you kill a particular mob and you get some kind of a big benefit. I don't really personally love that. In terms of, you know, the way Mythic Plus works and having my character play really differently inside a Keystone Dungeon compared to any other setting. But Frenzied sounds kind of cool, just kind of ramping up the intensity of the pack. You know, it's like, okay, well, we got to kill them before they kill us, but like they're taking more damage, but they're more dangerous. Like that seems okay to me. You know, I know the idea of providing stat buffs, like the haste and movement speed buff they mentioned here. That kind of stuff is very popular with players, so that's cool. I just don't want to be running around at like 30% movement speed, you know, in a Mythic Plus, and then you step out and you go do a raid, and your character just doesn't feel the same way. That to me is jarring. It's like jarring. I don't love that. I haven't played any of this stuff on beta or anything, so I can't really speak to how it feels right now. I think the overall theming is cool. I sort of lean more towards stuff that affects the mobs. I sort of like better than stuff that affects my character.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, I definitely follow that. I think that we are probably going to have to wait and see on a lot of testing to see what this feels like for players. I do hear you commenting about the feeling slower, and I remember Torghast being a great example of being like, wow, my character feels fantastic inside of this Torghast run, and then you walk out and you're like, oh, my character doesn't feel nearly as good anymore. And that's kind of what I was
Yeah.
worried about with time running being a very similar thing too, where you're like, oh, I leveled up this really cool character in time running. This is a lot of fun. Oh, well, now I hit max level and I'm no longer in time running anymore. And I lost all that fun stuff that I was doing. You don't want that feeling for players necessarily. So it's a
Yeah.
tricky thing to balance with that. Now,
There's a big.
oh, go
I
ahead.
feel like there's a big dissonance right now. Like if I'm switching back and forth between Remix and Dragonflight,
100%.
it's like
100%. Yeah.
now that'll go away obviously because they're going to shut Remix off. It's just going to be
Yeah.
gone. And so like
Yeah.
maybe to take you like a couple hours or whatever to downshift into like playing regular WoW, but you're not going to be going back and forth. But if
Yeah.
you're doing keystones and you get all these buffs in this mode, then you step out of the mode, you don't have the buffs. Like there's some dissonance there. I feel like for me, like the way that
Yeah. The way
I
you play.
approach playing, it's like
Yeah.
where I just had all that stuff. Now what's happening?
Yeah. All right. So at +4, we start seeing Fortified or Tyrannical being active, depending on the weekly rotation. It will alternate week by week. So now you're dealing with, on +4s, you're dealing with the Bargains and Fortified or Tyrannical. On +7s, you then get the Challenger's Peril becomes active inside all Keystones. Now, Challenger's Peril is a new affix, and it directly affects the dungeon's timer. This affix emphasizes precise play and strategic execution, placing players at greater risk on players' decisions. Basically, dying now takes away 15 seconds versus 5 seconds. So 3 times the punishment for a character dying. That's going to start kicking in at +7. So you'll have your Bargains, you'll have Tyrannical or Fortified, and if you happen to die, you will then affect the timer on a greater level, meaning, hey, the movement of going up in keystone level also means you should be better informed about what dungeons you're in and how to play your class and character in them by the time you hit 7s and above, because making mistakes are more punishing to your entire group overall by having that timer get affected even further. Jason, feelings on Challenger's Peril?
I think it's good,
Yeah.
fine. This is the thing that's been the most controversial from what the conversation that I've seen and from people that I've talked to, which is very strange to me. Overall, I think this is a mixed bag of changes. I think some of the stuff is really cool, and I'm not really sold on the way some of it sounds. But to me, this isn't a real sticking point. I think it is going to make sort of getting over that difficulty curve for the season harder, right? Like you're going to need to really master the dungeons because you want to have clean runs. But I've seen a lot of sort of complaints saying, well, if you wipe, then it's just going to kill a timer because it's so punishing. And most of the dungeons already work like that and have worked like that for a long time if you're playing at an actually challenging difficulty level for your team. I don't think this changes that too dramatically, but it does mean you're probably going to have more missed timers as you're building up that skill set, like mastering the dungeons and progressing through the system. It will probably cost you timers along the way. But once you sort of are in that maintenance mode of like, all right, let's do our vault keys or whatever for the week, this is,
It's a
essentially
non-affix.
free.
Yeah.
It's essentially free. Yeah. It's like, I mean, I think about what I'm doing right now, late in the season, late in the expansion, and okay, let's do some +8, just fill up the vault. All right, we're like +3ing these without even trying.
Right.
Like, what's the difference if we have a couple? Most of these keys we have 0 to 4 deaths, and if we had more or whatever, like, okay, so do we +2 a key instead of +3ing it, or we +1 it instead of +2ing it? Like, I think in practice, I don't think this really matters for most of the duration of a content's lifespan, but it will, you will be punished more when you are underpowered and underpracticed at the dungeon pool and working your way up. The stats they're gonna mount a lot faster, but part of this also depends on overall tuning, right? I guess the big caveat for me here is everything with these changes depends on how combat is tuned and how the dungeon timers are tuned. Because if the dungeon timers are decently generous, then this affix is, you want to pay attention to it, but it's not make or break. If the dungeon timers are really tight, then like you can't afford deaths, and maybe that means you need to pull smaller packs, or you need to use CC or something, to really make sure that you're not putting yourself in a position where you could have sort of that cascading series of deaths and people are running back and you're trying to save the damage you've done on the mobs and keep them in combat. And those kind of situations are going to become complete key killers. Like right now with the 5-second timers, like if you overpull close to the entrance or close to a checkpoint and your tank's alive and sustaining out, but stuff isn't dying, but AoE is killing people, but they can release and get back into combat, it's like it's kind of worth it. You can sustain that out and start chipping away at stuff, and you didn't waste any of the effective damage you already did. It's just taking a bit longer. But at plus 15-second deaths, I don't think that works anymore. You're better off just calling it right away. Like, okay, just wipe it and reset.
You're hitting my feeling about this that I worry about the most is from a pug perspective, especially. How much will people just abandon a key after one wipe because they felt like that was just such a timer loss? It's not worth continuing forward. Does this affix directly contribute to essentially keys failing, like people just abandoning keys and not even bothering to complete them because it just reduces the timer? And even though it might not necessarily, it might be something where, you could have actually still finished the key in time and gotten a reward. People just abandon it early because they don't feel like it's worth trying because they've already lost so much time. Oh, we wiped, so, we lost a minute and a half plus run back time. That's too rough. We're not going to bother with this, as opposed to losing like less than a minute. It's not a huge impact. Like in a lot of keys, they aren't so tightly tuned, especially at +7, that you can't have a lost 3 minutes or whatever it is of time. You still can't lose those 3 minutes and complete the dungeon. That's fine. It's just one of those cases of like, is this now just like a morale issue that they're potentially creating with this? That's the one thing I would point out with this, is it could be a morale killer for pugs.
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, pugs are such a delicate balance anyway, right? And it's really just a tough way to approach the Keystone dungeons, to be honest. Because you have no stakes, and if somebody's not having a good time, they just bounce, and then okay, there you go, you're back at square one. I think overall your goal here as a Mythic Plus player is to essentially like outgrow this affix. I'm not saying you're never going to die in a Keystone, but like most of us are not people who are pushing into the range of rating where we're shooting for titles and all that stuff, right? We're trying to have fun with the system, get some rewards, feel like we had a good time playing with the people we like to play with, or making some kind of progress on our character that felt good. And so you could do that within a range where you can essentially beat the game in a sense through character power and through practice, unlike the 0.01% key pushers, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like, you can essentially like outgrow Challenger's Peril, because you will die here and there in a dungeon. It's sort of unavoidable. Everybody dies in a dungeon sometimes, but you're not going to have those brick walls where, oh, we can't afford to die here, and then something goes wrong and then you wipe, right? Like, once you learn to avoid those pitfalls in any given dungeon pool, then this affix is really de-emphasized in my way of thinking.
Yeah. Okay, so on +7s, just to recap, you're dealing with one of the two of the bargains, of Xal'atath's bargains, because they appear on a weekly rotation. You're dealing with the Fortified or Tyrannical weekly rotation. You're dealing with Challenger's Peril on that weekly rotation. And now we're going to move up to 10s. And on 10s, both Fortified and Tyrannical are active at the same time. So dungeons become Fortified Tyrannical with the bargain still, with Challenger's Peril still. All right, that's +10s up into 12s. So just keeping that in mind, we are now moving into +12s. So on +12s, you have Fortified, you have Tyrannical, you have Challenger's Peril, and now the Xal'atath's bargain gets replaced with Xal'atath's Guile. So Xal'atath's Guile is a bit more punishing for players than what we previously saw in these sorts of things. Xal'atath revokes her bargain, empowering dungeon creatures with a 20% increase in health and damage. So basically, Xal'atath's Guile betrays players, revoking her bargains and increasing the health and damage of all enemies by 20%. So you have Fortified, Tyrannical, plus Guile, so another 20% on top of the Fortified and Tyrannical percentages. And you also have Challenger's Peril still happening, so you're still losing the additional timer, but you're not dealing with the bargains at all. That is essentially what a lot of players have been calling for. I'm just putting that out there, of saying, hey, we want no affixes inside Mythic Plus. We want the high-end keys to just be how good can you execute the keys. Well, guess what? That's basically what's happening. All the dungeon bosses in Trash are scaled up. They're then scaled up even further, and you essentially have a more punishing timer for people who die during the actual dungeon. So yeah, that is what we're looking at overall. I think this could be very punishing to a lot of groups at the high-end keystone levels. I think that there's going to be a very large jump when you hit 12, because having a tyrannical week at 10 and dealing with, you know, the bargain, which can also increase your damage if you're someone who's actually getting the orbs, if it's that particular bargain week, and you're sort of like having this like tyrannical and fortified are both there, you'll feel that, but it won't be that impactful. Getting that, okay, 10 Keystone 10, Keystone 11, Keystone 12, all that scaling that happens as you increase those keystones, on top of you hit 12, you go from 11 to 12, and there's an additional 20% bump. That is a lot. So I think you'll probably see players struggle with that bump, but are 12 supposed to be like end game Mythic Raider style stuff that people are doing, and they're that hardcore into doing Mythic Keystone dungeons, and that's who this is made for? I guess so. I guess that's what their aim is. Their aim is to say, hey, if you're more of a casual player who likes doing Mythic Plus, just stick to doing your 8s and 10s, and that's what you're going to do. And everyone else who wants to push farther can push farther, and they can get rid of the, you know, pesky affixes that might change the way you play your dungeon, and just focus on, hey, here's raw stats, increasing the buffs on these sorts of things. So have to see how that plays out, Jason.
Yeah, I mean, really, what this is saying is like 12 and above is just for the sweatiest, you know, and if, like, really, like, that's what it's for. And you know, that feels kind of dramatic and kicking in a little low for me. Now, granted, the game provides you no tangible reward of any kind above plus 10, other than if they keep the bonus chance at loot active. Right, they've done that traditionally, where it's like, okay, every keystone rank above 10, you get a 20% chance at an extra piece of loot. I mean, generally, you're going to want the higher track stuff from Mythic Raid and, you know, your vault, your keystone vault. Yeah. You know, I just look at this and I go, you know, trying to deal with Tyrannical and Fortified every week to try to get my teleports just sounds awful.
Yeah.
I don't like that in any way. And what we've talked about it on the show a lot over the years as Mythic Plus has kind of settled in, is how you have this flavor every week, right? You have sort of a different puzzle to solve, and you know, some weeks have different sort of flows, and you get like a break on the trash, and then you got to dial in your boss performance. Some weeks the bosses are kind of free, and you have to, you know, navigate the trash in a timely fashion. I don't know how we do this where everything in the dungeon has 20 or 30% more health on top of the per rank scaling, plus it's all doing like 15% more damage all the time in addition to anything else that happens with the bargain. Like, again, it comes down to tuning, and if it's tuned and it feels okay, fine. You know, I have kind of lightly complained about this to people who are listening to me in various places, and one sort of defense I've gotten, or whatever, or a thing that people like about this, is it provides consistency. I understand that line of thinking, but I don't know how much benefit there is to Keystone Dungeons consistently feeling bad. Well, like, so, if it feels bad, I don't care if it's consistent.
Yeah, what I want to dive into with this is the concept of I guess the thing that we've been talking about with Mythic Raid, up to this point of how accessible it is, how many people get to experience it, and how accessible that content should be for players to be able to experience it, right? Now, Mythic Plus is kind of a different beast because you are able to run the same dungeon multiple times a week. You are able to put yourself against that challenge as many times as the keystones allow you to. And you're someone who is able to sort of see these encounters, and these encounters don't evolve over time as you increase in difficulty. It's not like you're going from a Keystone 4 and now the boss does new things on Keystone 6 or 7, right? That's not the situation. So I do want to sort of identify that that is a differentiator here. It's just the question of, do we feel like by doing this, we're going to, they're creating a space for, as you said, the sweaties or the people who are really big into doing high-end keystones to sort of live and behave inside that area, and that everything below that is enough for everyone else to experience. And I waver on that. I feel like it probably is. I feel like this is actually a decent balance of saying, hey, you know what? If you want to earn your rewards and your portals and everything else, just 10s and below, stick to that world. That's your world. That's what you want to stay in. If you're someone who just wants to really challenge and push and do the crazy thing, essentially like gladiator level PvP, if you're wanting to do that, then by all means, go and hop into 12s and 14s and 15s and that kind of thing and enjoy. That content is made for you, and we're okay doing that, right? I'm totally fine with them designing niche content like pet battles or fishing or whatever it is as far as professions go, and you know, gold making and all sorts of stuff for a select group of players. I think it makes perfect sense to try and please that group of players, as long as all the focus and attention and all the tuning and balancing isn't towards that group of players, right? You have to acknowledge that's part of a larger player base, and this is a niche of that player base, and you're dealing with it. So as long as we don't start seeing dungeon changes come in to try and make the plus 12 experience better, I think we're probably sitting in a pretty good spot. And by better, I mean making it potentially worse for the lower end keystones, but better for the people in the higher end because that's who they want to please. That's fine, right? We don't want to run into another situation where they're designing content around the 1%. That's what I don't want to run into with this Mythic Plus content. And I feel like it's fine as long as this is the differentiating factor for plus 12s and above. Hey, that's the world that they're going to live in. That's cool. That's great. But don't go, we're going to buff this boss's health percentage or damage or whatever it is because the people up in 12s need to be taught a lesson. That should not happen at all, right?
Yeah, really. Yeah.
And
I mean, I think that scaling above plus 12 is going to be pretty punishing out of the gate. So
yeah, well, and what I'm hoping is that basically what they're going to tweak is the actual Xalatath's Guile, right? If they actually tune Guile, then you're only tuning things that affect those upper end players. That's what I kind of like about this choice of being like, we're going to replace the bargains with Guile, because they go, yeah, you know what? We're not even going to tune Tyrannical and Fortified. Those affect everybody as far as their play style and stuff goes. If we want to screw with those higher end players and make stuff more difficult, we'll just make Guile do 5% more, damage and health. And now suddenly everything's like, oh crap. Okay, well, everyone doing 12s and above now just got themselves a big challenge. Everyone below that didn't get affected. That's what I like about this. The Guile lets them affect just that group of players. And I think that's smart.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really sure why they feel like they need to draw this kind of line in the sand within the system, but they're doing it. Fine. I mean, what it means to me is like I'm probably not doing any keys above 10, really.
Yeah,
realistically, I don't want to, right? Like there's no end game there for me. I'm not gonna go high enough to get an end of season title, and there's no tangible benefit to pushing your rating above KSH to timing dungeons above plus 10. I can just do more other stuff in the game. I don't have to just do that. So, they've drawn a pretty hard line here at plus 12. I'm really curious to see how Fortified Tyrannical feel active together all the time. I mean, that is going to be my goal for the season, is getting my teleports, and so timing plus 10s. And to me, Tyrannical and Fortified kind of are the ones that set the tone for the dungeon every week, not so much the other affixes usually, or at least the affixes that are reasonable to deal with in the current pool. And now maybe that's just me, and maybe the other affixes are creating bigger problems than I'm giving them credit for. I find them mostly annoyances that are distracting me from how hard the trash or the boss is hitting or whatever, how much health it has on a given week. So like to me, I would say that Fort and Tyrannical are the things that should have just gone. And maybe you do an extra flat 10 percentage points of health and damage on everything in the Keystone dungeon compared to its Mythic 0 companion, and then you adjust the per rank scaling or whatever as need be. I think they're the ones that feel the moldiest and sort of add the least to the experience. I'm not necessarily going to say that I'm sad to see all of the old affixes going, but I mean, to me, like, I read this and went, okay, that's interesting. They're throwing all this stuff out. Okay. Okay. They're going to do some kiss curse mechanics. All right. That's interesting. And then I get to the point where I realize that we're talking about all of that extra health and damage on every mob in every dungeon every week if you're trying to get teleports. And I went, I think I hate this, actually. But again, it all depends on tuning. It's I without I mean, we're getting hero talents. It's going to be a lot of extra power for people and a lot of extra tools in dungeon situations. A lot of flexibility to just grab whatever you want for those kind of multi-target situations or whatever. If the difficulty and what I don't want is for this to feel more difficult and more daunting than doing Keystone Hero and teleports is. Let's say season 3. Season 4 is a bad example because it's wacky time. We already know all the dungeons and all that, and we're super powerful. But like, I don't think that getting over those kind of rating humps and getting those things done in season 3 was, a particularly super high bar challenge where I was sweating like, am I going to get this done in time? Where I have sort of had that in earlier seasons in like Shadowlands and stuff. I didn't feel that way in Dragonflight Season 3. And so if we land in that area where it's like, okay, it's a mountain to climb, there is a bar to clear for sure, but it feels good to play. Like, okay, I'll take that if that's how it ends up. I mean, looking at it on paper a couple months out, some of this I think sounds cool, and some of this I think sounds like it's going to feel awful for most of us.
Yeah.
But we'll see. We'll see. They got to tune it. They got to tune combat classes. They got to tune the individual dungeons, and that's always the last thing they do. And they never stop doing it, right? Or they stop doing it like way 2 years down the road when they're gearing up for the next release. So, it's not like if it feels like garbage to play, they're not just going to leave it sit there and fester. But hopefully we don't come out of the gate in a garbage state either.
Yeah, I'm hoping that Mythic Plus, they're not going to abandon Mythic Plus. It's too integral a part of their end game experience for players. I'm with you that Fortified and Tyrannical feel moldy. I think it would have been neat to see them go, all right, we're getting rid of Fortified and Tyrannical entirely. At +2, you experience a bargain, and that rotates. At +7, you get the Peril, and that sort of kicks in for players. At +10, you have to deal with both bargains at the same time inside +10s and 11s. And then at +12, we ditch the bargain because it becomes the Guile, and you have to deal with Peril and Guile for +12s and above. No Tyrannical Fort. That would have been interesting to me to go, okay, so if you want to get your portals, there is the added challenge of you have to deal with both of these at the same time, but it's Kiss Curse, which means yes, mobs are going to have the orbs that can fall down on them and buff them, and that can make them really dangerous with the haste that they're also gaining when they go below 30% health. But at the same time, you also could be getting these orbs, which then increase your haste to blow them up faster, and they take 20% increased damage when they go below 30% health. And that would be an interesting twist to be like, here's the challenge to get your portals without having Tyrannical and Fort active at the same time. Because I'm with you. I'd rather see them get rid of Tyrannical and Fortified and just play with the tuning of the actual keystone system of every keystone increases by this percentage of health and damage than to have a rotating Tyrannical and Fortified come in that really tips the scales towards trash is going to suck this week, bosses are going to suck this week. Like that's, not really what I'm looking for. So hopefully they actually listen to some feedback that players get out there when they start seeing these sorts of things, and we see more changes happen. We know that last week they just threw the whole system out and came up with something new. So,
right, yeah.
It's entirely possible we see that again. I think losing Fortified and Tyrannical would be really nice. And I think you could definitely do things with the bargains that still spice up the lower end keys where, yeah, between, +2 and +7, you're just dealing with a bargain that rotates. So people can sort of get through those keystones and get a feel for it. +7, you have to deal with peril. Okay, you got that extra, by this point, you should know the route of the dungeons that you're doing. And if you happen to die, it's more punishing for you. +10s, oh, time to get your portals. Okay, deal with both bargains at the same time. +12, all right, this is for the folks who are just enthusiasts. This is the enthusiast group. I'm not going to call them sweaties. I'm going to call them enthusiasts. These are the enthusiast Mythic Plus players. You guys, we're getting rid of the bargains because we know you don't want them. We're giving you Guile, which is something that we can tune on our own. It's going to start at 20%. That's going to boost up the health and damage of everything inside these dungeons that you're doing. And if we feel we need to tweak that up to 25 or 30%, we can do that if we wanted to. And outside of that, you're just dealing with the peril, which is more punishment for dying, because you guys should, as enthusiasts, know routes through this place that are effective and efficient and be willing to deal with the consequences of that. And just ditch Fortified Tyrannical. I'm with you on that. They're moldy. Get rid of them.
Yeah, I just don't think they serve a great purpose. I think there's better ways you can just make Keystone dungeons like more threatening than a Mythic Zero at this point. One thing I guess that we don't know yet, they make it sound like there's going to be a pool of bargains, and they're just giving us examples of 2, which are the first
Could
2
be.
they tested.
Yep.
But they don't put like a number on it.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering how many bargains are we going to actually see in the pool, and what other kind of ideas are in that vein, and how long is the rotation going to be? Is it going to be like a 4-week rotation with them, or 8 weeks or something? Which I guess we'll see. Who knows? I mean, I think the way this is set up would kind of say maybe there's 4, and then you have like the Fort and Tyrannical rotating at that +4 spot. So then you have sort of this combo of you get bargain 1 with Fort and then bargain 2 with Tier, and then you kind of flip it all around or something. So you mix up the combos where the Fort and Tier kick in at lower ranks with the different bargains. So we'll see. I'm sure we'll see more. Probably as soon as we're done recording this, they'll put up a new blog with some new bargains they're going to test this week and all that, But I mean, we're sort of led to believe in this blog that there's going to be more than just those 2 effects. So, I mean, I think like somewhere around like an 8 to 10 week rotation is healthy, where you see sort of you have some differences beyond just the dungeon pool or whatever. So there might be some other cool ideas, and maybe there's some more bargains that are going to kind of smooth that difficulty curve as you try to get into +10s. If you can really take advantage of them, that could be a huge part of it too.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I like that they're making like really bold and broad changes to Mythic Plus. I'm not one of those people who was desperate for Mythic Plus to get this level of change, right? I kind of enjoy the mode as it is, really, to be honest. But I think it's always worth taking another look at something and trying to freshen it up and doing I mean, we've had Mythic Plus now for 8 years, right? And it's sort of settled into the state it's been in. They obviously have changed it up a bunch throughout Dragonflight and stuff, but the general structure of a lot of the stuff has been locked in for a long time. And I think it's good to do a big refresh on some of this stuff, and time will tell, and it all comes down to how it's tuned and how it feels to actually play. On its surface, reading this blog, I think for me this is a real mixed bag. I think there's some really good stuff and some stuff that I'm not looking forward to experiencing.
Yeah, we'll have to see how it all plays out in testing and what else changes, because I expect there to be more changes based off of what we've seen so far. All right, Honor. This is more development notes based around for War Within. Still on War Within for folks who are curious. Honor can now be transferred between characters at an 80% conversion rate, which means if you're someone who wants to move Honor around to a new character, start doing PvP on a new class, new character, whatever it is, you can actually do that inside War Within. That's something you can do through the Warband system. They're also having to address the jewelers stuff as far as adding gems to PvP gear. With the removal of the PvP stuff from the vault, it means that vault currency should not be used for PvP activity. That just doesn't make sense. So they are making it so that you can actually buy these jeweler settings and insert them for Honor from a vendor, and bloodstones, and you can insert them into your PvP gear and essentially add sockets to your PvP gear, so you can put gems into your PvP gear. So that's one way of getting them. Another way is they apparently are just going to end up dropping occasionally out of the end of match boxes, which are going to be really great to see for a lot of folks. So people will be, I'm sure, encouraged to be participating in that, as well as a higher chance to drop from certain war mode activities. So people who are out in the world participating in war mode can also just get a chance to get the jeweler settings to be able to put sockets into their PvP stuff that they want to do. So that is the solution that they came up with to the fact that they've removed the Great Vault PvP stuff, and they want to be sure PvPers now have a way of getting those sockets back. So good to see that.
Some cool changes here. I mean, this is all part of a bigger picture of, pretty big changes coming to PvP itemization, and really kind of decoupling a lot of that stuff from the sort of weekly drumbeat of, weekly reset and Great Vault and all that stuff, right? This is more tied into, like, obviously there is like a weekly component to everything in World of Warcraft, but this sort of brings it more towards direct PvP participation, resulting in the opportunity to, acquire whatever rewards or whatever. You're not waiting on, they give the example about, the bi-weekly crafting sparks and all that, and just kind of taking that out of the PvP realm entirely. I mean, I'm not a PvPer. I don't have any PvP gear. It's just not part of my WoW diet, but I feel like people who are really into that it's sort of like a separate experience from the PvE side anyway, really. So I think it makes sense. I can't speak to it too much, from my personal perspective, but I get the idea of, like, okay, we're taking PvP gear and really just shunting it off into its own realm, and it has its own kind of rules. It has its own kind of timing. I think that's probably going to benefit people who really only play the game that way, right? Like, if all you really do is like log in PvP, then what a pain it must be to jump through some of the PvE hoops that the game puts in front of you for gearing, and it seems like a lot of that stuff is going to kind of go by the wayside for War Within Season 1.
Yeah, you're going to get all your recipes for crafting and stuff off vendors too, so good to see a lot of that being considered when it comes to PvP stuff. Okay, War Within PTR development notes. So this is the stuff that I think is coming in 2 to 3 weeks that we will see for players who are going to be hopping into the pre-patch. This is the pre-patch notes. They are halving avoidance and leech rating percentages on gear. So if you're someone who's like, hey, right now I have 800 leech, and that gives me, which is a ridiculous amount of leech, but let's say you have 800 leech, and that gives you like 12%. Once pre-patch goes live, that's now 6%. Just be aware. That's what that's doing. So you're now dropping all those percentages down when pre-patch comes out. So be ready for that. Both stats, avoidance in particular, are extremely effective against the damage non-tank players face. By the end of the expansion, the amount of avoidance appearing on gear reduces so much damage that acquiring pieces with it can feel required to do the hardest content, particularly extremely high Mythic Plus keys. By reducing the amount of value given per rating, our goal is for these pieces with those stats to remain valuable, but for the gap between players with or without them to be closer. So in other words, hey, if you're someone who has been gathering all the avoidance gear forever and you are the top, craziest, best avoidance player on the server, this isn't going to make you not be that. You're still going to be that. It's just the difference between you and the number 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 slot is lower. That's the difference. The RNG effect of getting these additional stats is reduced as far as the amount of benefit that you're gaining from having them or not having them, which I think overall is probably a good add for that. They're also reducing leech and avoidance effects from certain spells, things like Lichborn, Blood Scent, Soul Rending, Regenerative Magic, Sentinel's Protection, Predator's Thirst, Hunter's Avoidance, Sanctified Plates, Sanguine Teachings, Leeching Poison, Shadow Heart, Lifeblood, and Leeching Strikes, as well as Seasoned Soldier, are now all halved. So just keep that in mind. A lot of the times where a half was a 5%, it went down to being 3%. A lot of times where a half was a 3%, it went down to being a 2%. So they're giving the players the benefit of that extra 0.5% in all those situations to ensure that things feel right, including things like Predator's Thirst for Hunter actually went down to 6% as opposed to going down to 5%. So they've done some things to make sure there's balance and tuning happening. They didn't just half everything and walk out the door. They actually did some tuning and stuff to make sure stuff felt good. So yeah, overall, I think it's probably a necessary change.
Yeah, I think they want to emphasize healers, more and actually make it so that you want to have a healer healing damage that the party's taking, which makes sense. Although the state of tuning right now, which beta's not tuned properly, but what you're hearing is like people are yo-yoing from 1% to full, basically from unavoidable damage, and so that's not really what you want. That doesn't feel good overall, and stuff like avoidance and leech smooths that out certainly. There's a pretty big hit to warrior with the leech changes. We kind of have preferentially spec'd into 15% passive leech all expansion, and that's covered up a bit of gaps. Warrior's probably the least strong self-healing tank class, and doesn't have a wealth of options against magic damage. So having all that leech baked in has been really nice. Even at 8% is probably still preferable, but that's okay. I don't know. I think the avoidance change is kind of interesting because it sort of begs the question, like, what is this doing here at this point then? Like, if it's supposed to be like a niche cool bonus, then is it still that if it's not actually good anymore to get a little bit of it, right? Like, I don't know. I think the game does need they need to take a hard look at itemization and stats across the board, and we need a refresh in that regard. It's been a really long time, and back in the day, the game had way more RPG flavor around stats and stat builds and itemization and stats on gear.
Yeah.
It's been a long time that it's been this sort of model of, okay, you got your primary flexes around on gear, you get these 4 secondaries, and that's it. And then if you're lucky, you get one of these couple tertiaries. And this is the second time that recently, I can't remember if it was it 10-3, they peeled back leech rating once already from gear, and now they're doing it again. Now they're hitting avoidance too. It's like, if you make these tertiaries that are supposed to be cool bonuses so much worse, like, at what point do you even stop caring about having any of it? And then why have it on the gear at all? I think that's like my biggest wish list thing for WoW at this point, is a real serious look and a broad itemization pass and stats pass, because I think that stuff it's been too static for too long, and the only thing they've really done is make the stuff that's supposed to be bonuses worse all the time, which just feels weird. I think overall, once combat is tuned to be in a good state, I don't think it really matters if everybody has a less leech across the board. Fine. That's opportunity for healers to be healing more, which is really what healers are supposed to be doing. But if you have everybody just yo-yoing between nearly dead and full, then that's also not satisfying gameplay for anyone. So all that's got to be kind of dialed in.
It does. I'm with you that I really enjoyed the days when there was armor pen and hit rating and all sorts of stuff that was thrown in there as far as the different stats go. I do understand them trying to make things simple. We were going through a phase of the game at the point when they got rid of those, that things were becoming more complex. We're still going through that phase by adding hero levels to this whole thing. I do feel like the game is teetering on that weird balance between, hey, this is really complicated for a new player, and hey, we don't have enough RPG and choice and stuff inside of our RPG game. And it's that difficult balance of like, okay, if we go too far one way, we end up with like Path of Exile level type of, mapping for skilling out your character and stats and how stats work, et cetera, which is greatly intimidating to a huge amount of players when they see it and just go, wow, I'm not even interested in this at all. And then you go back the other way and you're like, well, you don't want this to just be like a 4-button click game with, stats that don't really factor at all for your character very much. And it's a very easy thing to play. So it's like back and forth between the two. And I do feel like they're in a weird spot where they've made professions more complicated, made talent systems more complicated, made a lot of things more complicated. But stats, we miss that. Like, we want something in there stats wise that's going to spice that up a bit. So I think that's a future expansion thing that we could look at. but it's certainly a topic that I think is worth revisiting as part of the WoW team. I think they could be looking at that and going, all right, where does this fit? We need something with this that's new
that
and
might
spicy.
that might be something where you go like after Last Titan, right?
Yeah.
Like 4 years from now or whatever, then you start digging into that because you want maybe a more consistent experience throughout the World Soul expansions. And then, I mean, just based on the theming that we already know about, it seems like Last Titan, the follow-up to Last Titan would be a good place to sort of break the rules, right? Like just reintroduce something different. I don't really want to wait like 6 years or whatever for itemization changes that I think we kind of desperately need, but it would make sense. And this might also be my own personal kind of, I don't know, drum that I'm beating. I don't know if anybody else really cares about this stuff, but going back and playing some Classic and whatever else, it's like, yeah, stats used to be way more interesting, and there used to be more choices to make. There used to be more variety among items, and that added a lot of RPG flavor to the process, and everything is very homogenous now, and I don't think that that's necessarily just better, It certainly has its advantages, and I think it has served the game well in some ways, but I do feel like there's opportunity to inject flavor into it, and I think the tertiaries to some degree are supposed to be that, right? Like Avoidance and Leech are supposed to sort of be those cool, exciting bonuses that feel like you're powering up your character with some gear that is unique and has interesting traits, but not if converting the benefit from the rating, the coefficient that rating, converts into percentage of these stats. If that's terrible, then is it a cool bonus? And
yeah.
I get the rationale for why they want to change this stuff, but I think it's like a Band-Aid on a much bigger underlying issue with how we sort of relate to our characters through stats and through gear.
Yeah. I do think it's good to lessen the gap that RNG can create between character performance. I think that's good. I do feel though that you're right. I feel like it's a Band-Aid on a much larger problem that I'd like to see addressed at some point in the future and looked at. I'm sure they are looking at that in particular. Okay. We also get an updates in this PTR build for the pre-patch to the login screen for people with their warband. You're going to have 4 characters there. You can change what order they are in your warband by moving them up and down your list of characters. There's now a search feature to be able to find your characters inside your character panel. So you can just search for them if that's something you want to do. Hovering over the characters gets you their class specialization and professions and a bunch of character information, a bunch of stuff about them. That's what you want to check out. They are also, and this is probably the bigger announcement for me, increasing the amount of macro slots for characters to 30 from 18. I had the amount of times I've had to delete macros or move macros from like my shared screen to individual character screen and then copy them over to multiple characters has been a lot because I cap out the 18 macros. So going up to 30 macros is really nice. It's along the same lines of like, hey, how much information are we willing to save on our server side as far as this goes? And I guess they decided that adding 12 more macros is not that big of a deal size-wise, similar to them expanding the amount of profiles we have for our talent system was not that big of a deal for them to do. They're able to handle it server load-wise and storage-wise, so we're getting more macros for our characters, and that is something I am super excited about.
Awesome. And super nice with hero talents coming in too, because you're going to have there are going to be some new active abilities introduced via hero talents, and not every hero talent spec, I don't know what to call them. I don't think they even have like a name for it other than hero talents. Not all of them have new active abilities, but a lot of them do, and so you might want to set up more new macros around that, especially if you're using multiple new buttons. Everybody's getting a ton of class changes and stuff, so this is awesome. This seems like one of those load bearing things. It's like, oh no, what's going to break if we increase the default macro slots? Like, have they ever done that before? I can't think, but it's a nice bonus, and it's good timing with all the new class stuff coming in.
Yeah, I feel like I want to call them like which hero type or which hero. There's got to be a good phrase in there for us to come up with for this.
Yeah, I just don't think there's anything official. I think
your hero focus.
Hero talents.
What's your hero focus? Like, I feel like
I don't know how they don't have like a name for those sub specs. I don't think there is one. I don't think there's a name for that categorically. I think they just call them hero talents, which is weird because they should have like a name. Like sub spec isn't too like sexy or
No.
World of Warcrafty. It should feel more heroic
Especially
than
not
like
with Sub Rogue.
sub specialization or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like it should have something else. But
Yeah.
just calling the hero spec a hero talent that's weird. That's not even what it is, really. So I don't know what else to call it at the moment, though. Maybe we'll figure it out before August.
Who knows? All right, phase 4 of Season of Discovery is going live on July 11th. So we're moving into Season of Discovery chat here, folks, tail end of the show. So yes, July 11th at 1 p.m. Pacific time, that's 4 p.m. Eastern, all players will be able to level 60, discover new class runes, enter Molten Core raid, and face Ragnaros and more. We have all the access to all the classic zones is going to be up. You're going to be able to collect the epic riding mounts. You are going to have the world buff for Alliance characters, Might of Stormwind, which is going to increase your hit points by 300%, 15% haste to melee attacks, and 10 mana regen every 5 seconds. This does not stack with the War Chief's Blessing, apparently, which is good to know. But that's a new buff for Alliance, for them to get a buff out there as well. They're also increasing experience gains from level 1 to 49 by 150% and by 50% from level 50 to 59 to make that a little bit easier for folks to level up. The new rune slots are a ring slot and a cloak slot for players to be able to put new runes on their gear. So you'll be able to put 2 new runes into those things. There's going to be a lot of class adjustments, so expect your class to feel very different. I know Boomkin's got like a complete overhaul, and there's a lot of different feel that they're putting with a lot of classes, so expect that to be interesting. There's profession and reputation updates with the new enhanced professions from Argent Dawn, Thorium Brotherhood, Hydraxian Warlords, and the Timbermaw Hold. Blacksmithing and leatherworking profession specializations will become interchangeable for a fee sometime post the launch in Phase 4. In other words, if you're someone who's like, hey, I want to be the male armor focused leather worker, you can then change over to being a leather armor focused leather worker if that's something you want to do for a fee. That's something you're able to swap out. They're reducing the cost of honor granting blood-stained commendations from the Blood Moon event in Stranglethorn Vale. So if you're someone who wants to keep doing that, guess what? You're not going to get as much honor from doing that event, because I assume they're going to add a new PvP event. They're also making sure Alterac Valleys is going to be available for PvP for folks who are interested in that. The level 60 dungeons we get to face off against are Blackrock Depths, Blackrock Spire, Dire Maul All Three Wings, Scholomance, Strathholm, and a new mystery dungeon to discover for players. Guess what? Season Discovery will have a little bit of discovery for the first people who find it and then tell everyone on Wowhead. Blackrock Depths, it's just the second half is what we get access to for level 60. So keep that in mind, because BRD was already something people could poke around in at level 50. Tier 0 armor updates and Quest Chain is going to be available soon. So assuming what they mean here with this Tier 0 is essentially what we saw previously for folks who were leveling up. You could go to a vendor and essentially buy like an outdoor tier set. So I'm assuming they're going to be updating those Tier 0 sets and give you a Quest Chain for the launch for you to be able to get those sorts of things. And PvP class sets for rank 10 have been added as well. So that's going to be something else folks will be able to dive into at level 60 and enjoy that content as well. Man, Black Rock Eruption is going to be the new event. The raw power of Ragnaros summoning is causing an upheaval in Black Rock Mountain. Players can experience more story behind this upheaval and take part in the reoccurring event and the associated quests with this event while it's active. It's timed and occurs every 2 hours with additional creature spawns, daily quests, and bonus honor rewards from PvP within Black Rock Mountain. Increase your reputation with the Thorium Brotherhood and earn access to valuable crafting materials and other rewards. So we get a brand new look at the lore around the summoning of Ragnaros, as well as the new PvP area, which used to be Stranglethorn Vale, is now moving into Black Rock Mountain, which I cannot picture all those chains that run everywhere and people finding sneaky spots to hide out and try and snipe people, or, warriors hitting charge to a target and then just like running up a chain and then hitting someone will be rather amusing, particularly if that person has any kind of knockback at all. The experience from world bosses like Lord Kazak and Azaragos are things that players are going to be able to jump into and get to try out on July 18th. So those world bosses are going to wait a week before they launch, as the global brand new instance versions of those encounters are going to go live. So presumably this means that they could actually do some twists to those encounters if they wanted to. The encounters are going to be experienced with up to 40 players, but will be tuned around 20 player content. So as long as you're hopping into those instances with at least 20 players, you should be able to take these big bosses down. And it makes them both pickup group friendly with the 40 players, or you can actually just get in there with your own little raid team at 20 if that's what you want to do and experience those bosses. Molten Core and Onyxia's Lair are both also going to be popping out on the 25th. So 2 weeks after launch. So you have 2 weeks to do the dungeons and the other stuff you want to do before the actual big raids go live. They're going to go live at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific on July 25th. And you can experience Molten Core as a 20-player dungeon with 10 classic bosses, revamped loot, redesigned tier 1 sets, and more. Players will also be able to turn up the heat with a new variable difficulty mechanic, allowing players to earn more rewards for undertaking a higher difficulty. Don't forget your fire resist gear. You're going to need it. We'll be adding one more surprise to this classic raid dungeon for intrepid adventurers to discover. Onyxia will also be adjusted to accommodate 40 or fewer players, along with some additional loot adjustments. So, all right, man, that's a whole chunk of blog to get through as far as what's going on with Phase 4. But starting it all off, let's talk about runes. We got 2 new runes, Cloak and Ring. I think that makes perfect sense. These runes are going to be things that you go out and discover in the world as far as all the different classes and specs go. You might have, there's going to be obviously more for Druid than there will be for any other class because you have 4 different specs that covers. However, you're going to be out finding these, putting them on your cloaks and rings, adding them in combination with the other stuff you got going on, and I'm sure there'll be some fun things for you to find. The one thing that's not mentioned at all in this post at all, catch-up mechanic for old runes. I love that there's a 150% increased experience gain, which will help Jason out, getting from 1 to 49. That's great. I love that 50 to 59 is a 50% experience gain, because it probably needs to be 100%, but we'll see. That's going to be helpful for players as well, because 50 to 60 was a slog to do in Classic. So I'm hoping that they revisit that a little bit, maybe once we start seeing how players are leveling through this, because it'll take a little while to get to max level. But there's no catch-up mention of how do you get the old runes. I really cannot emphasize this enough. There needs to be a vendor in the game you can go to, and if you choose to spend gold on it, to buy the runes from the previous phases, so you can just have that power. They can even limit it based off levels if they want. So if phase was between this and this, you have to be this level to buy this rune. That's fine. They can do that if that's what they want to do, but they need to actually allow players to choose to opt out of running around the world for hours at a time to get all of their runes. They need to. Similarly with the books, things like the Druid Resurrection, those sorts of spells need to be things that are just on a vendor that people can pick up, so they don't have to find a Scarlet Monastery group and grind it until it happens to drop. That is not an acceptable thing to be doing in a limited time experience like this. These experiences tend to last 3 months tops. That's what they last. And then we move into the next one. The previous ones were all 2 months. So like I'm saying 3 months because I think we're probably going to sit at level 60 for a bit longer before we see phase 5 roll out with new dungeons. So I really do need them to be like, yeah, we've looked at this. We're going to allow players to catch up. Here's how you can catch up. So you're not traveling around the world at max level at 60 going, all right, where's this thing inside this zone? Let me pull up a thing. Okay, well, it's not hard to do because I'm level 60. I can kill this stuff easily, but it takes me an hour because there's so much travel time. That isn't acceptable to me because a character at 60 should feel powerful and should feel ready to enter that content. And if you can't resurrect on a druid because you haven't grinded Scarlet Monastery to get the book to drop, that sucks. Like, people won't want you in their group as their healer. Just FYI, you need to be able to resurrect people. So let's get these things solved. Please and thank you as far as the runes go. Jason, how are you feeling about coming back into Season of Discovery?
Oh, I don't know. I really don't. I want to. I want to, but I only have so much time, and I only have so much time to play games out of that time, and then I only have so much time to play WoW in that pie, and then I just have other priorities. I have a lot of work to do. My character's level 26, you know. I'm decked out from phase 1, but I have a lot of leveling to do, and then I have all the phase 2 and 3 runes to get, and like, or I guess I could say I don't care about getting all the runes, but I'm gonna focus on the ones that they tell
Yeah.
me that I need, and like that's kind of daunting. I don't have anybody to play with, you know, like the ZTH kind of crew that was playing is long gone. Everybody just gave up on it, and right when phase
Yep.
2 started, basically, it just never even happened. So, you know, I'd have to. There's a lot of investment I'd have to make into getting back into this. It sounds cool. Like I like the idea of the mystery dungeon. That sounds really neat. Tier 0 armor and a quest chain to start acquiring that sounds like a really nice inclusion at max level. Um, you know, I like some of the ideas about adding class agnostic runes that you know kind of take care of some of the more maintenancey things like spell hit or what have you.
Yeah.
Those sound like nice additions. I like the fact that you know they're centering a world event around Blackrock Mountain. That sounds really cool. I don't know how this fits into my schedule, you know,
Yeah.
and it comes out. I mean, we were talking a little bit before we went live, like you know, this probably has a week and a half tops before pre-patch comes out to like be the thing. The raids won't even be open by then.
Raids aren't gonna be open. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of crossover on SOD with the retail audience, more so than other versions of Classic, I feel like. And I mean, I think people are going to be really tuned up to get into pre-patch, whatever the pre-patch events are going to end up being, and start getting ready for War Within. And yeah, like for somebody like me who I laid down SOD back in like February and haven't picked it back up, it's like I have so much work to do just to even start experiencing any of this. But and it's just not, it's so off my radar, you know. Retail's been just much more vibrant for me, and it's obviously my main focus. But like a lot of the stuff we're doing here sounds really cool, and I would love to be able to check it out. But I don't know. I don't know how I like would shift into the mode where this is the priority of the thing that I want to do is get this character leveled up and get caught up on all this other stuff, and then you know get out into the new content. I don't, especially knowing like, okay, I don't have an option for doing the raids, right? Like I don't have anybody at this point. So now I gotta, you know, I gotta find a whole new group to fit in with or something. And, you know, I just, that's just not realistic for me, unfortunately. I mean, I might, when it goes up, like, I don't know, maybe I'll check it out and start getting some levels and see what it's feeling like. And, you know, maybe if the Nightmare Incursion daily quest hub is accessible at like level 25, then that might be sort of a good way to just get my feet wet, right? It's like, okay, go do some dailies here. I can kind of do it on my schedule after reset. And, you know, I think there's some opportunity there from what I'm reading in the blog post that there's some entry points, but I think ultimately it's just too low priority for me compared to, you know, tail end of Dragonflight into War Within pre-patch. And I know there are people who just live in the classic environment and whatever's happening in retail doesn't even matter to them. And so that's fine. I don't, you know, I think they're probably the people who are really invested in SOD are probably desperate for this with how long phase 3 has gone on. For me, it's like this, the timing is just another piece of the puzzle that makes it too hard for me to engage with, I feel like.
Fair. I mean, that's absolutely a fair opinion to have, which is part of why I emphasize these catch-up mechanics are so important. Because I do feel like there's people like yourself who'd be like, yeah, I'll check it out for like a week or two and see what's going on with this. If I didn't have to spend that week or two just grinding to catch up with everyone else, you're like, yeah, that's that's the problem I have. I feel like we should have a much more accelerated pace for players who want to actually get into this and start experiencing it. And yeah, 150% experience increase is nice. It is. That does still means that they're going to be spending 4 days or 5 days not playing with their friends while their friends are leveling up to 60. And then their friends are going to be doing the 60 content and they're like, all right, I just hit 50. And you're like, great. So now just level the rest of the way and then you can play with us. And by that point, you're like, well, pre-patch is coming out. I'm kind of, this was fun. Well, I guess I could do it, but I'm not going to experience the end game. And then their friends at end game are like, well, we don't have enough people to raid because it's all 20-man raids. So I guess we're just not raiding this, phase. Great. That is my concern. That right there is my concern for this entire phase of content, because as soon as they moved up to 20 player, we saw a very large drop off from what I saw in rating and the amount of people who were rating, because you just couldn't maintain teams as easily. There's a few very large guilds that can maintain teams, and outside of that, it's really hard to put together teams to do the 20 player content with, organized rating wise. So I'm glad they pulled back the reins on a 40 player Molten Core, because I really think that would have been like, hey, unless you're part of one of these 3 guilds, you're not rating Molten Core unless you're bringing in a bunch of pugs, which sounds like a nightmare to do inside of that content. So I'm glad they pulled back the reins on that, but I still feel like this experience needs to be more accelerated than it already is, and needs to be something that really delivers players that wacky, almost time running-esque kind of feel to playing this classic content. And I don't think they're there yet. I don't think they've pushed the throttle forward enough with this content to be able to do it. So I don't know if I'm going to be hopping into phase 4. Like, I might just completely pass on phase 4 and level up in my own time and not raid. And, you know, I might just be done with Season Discovery because of what happened in phase 2, what happened even worse in phase 3, and then the plans going into phase 4. I feel like they are literally not designing this for my type of play. They just aren't. They just aren't respecting my time enough when it comes to the limited time I have to play. With the content they're designing, they're basically telling me, hey, unless this is one of your primary experiences that you're going to be spending time on every week, this isn't something that, and you have friends who are doing the same, this isn't something that you can actually have fun with and experience. And I think that's unfortunate. So yeah, I feel like it's just not for me. We'll have to see how it all goes and if I hop into it or not. But before we move on from Season Discovery, there's one last post here from Agrin we want to cover, which is the raid lockouts, because they initially said that they were going to have Molten Core and Inixia's Lair on a twice a week lockout. It was like every 5 days they were going to have a reset happen. They are not doing that for Molten Core. It's going back to a 7-day lockout period based off player feedback. And they're keeping Inixia on the 5-day lockout, as well as Kazakh and Azaragos. Those are all going to be on the 5-day lockout. So you'll see those happening twice a week for teams that want to get together and do it. All right, man. Well, with that, I want to take a moment to thank our patrons. They contribute a ton to our show and help us to improve on the content we create. We couldn't do all of the amazing and fun things that we do for our patrons without them. Like, the money they give helps the show stay on the rails and helps us keep putting these episodes out on a weekly basis. So we want to thank all of you. I'd like to do a special shout out to Alianas, Arajian, James, Kapawi, Max, Pinky, Shorel, and Rager. Thank you so much for what you give. And another special shout out to Luke, who hopped in on our Patreon and supported the show. Thank you so much, Luke, and welcome. I hope you found your way over to the Discord and are saying hi to people over there. If you're someone who wants to join our Patreon, you can do that at patreon.com/thestartingzone. And you can just hop in, and, you know, all the episodes are up there for free for people who want to listen to. But if you want to support the show, you can choose to become a patron at the $1 tier or the $3 tier or the $10 tier, wherever it is you feel that you can support us. And that really means a lot and goes a long way to keeping the archives online, as Jason always says, and as well as keeping the show running on a weekly schedule. So thank you.
Absolutely. Welcome aboard, Luke. Thank you for the support. It means a lot. And yes, thank you, patrons, past and present. We're coming up on, it's almost, 7 years we've been running the campaign at this point. So, I mean, your support's been a lot to us over the years and helped kept us on the rails and keeping us in production. So we couldn't do it without you. We thank you so much. And we appreciate everything that everybody's contributed to the show over the years and keeps us going.
Yeah, it does. If you want to support the show another way, you can. You can go onto your iTunes, your Apple Podcasts, and leave us a 5-star review. They really help us out. They boost us up those charts, help the show get recognized. And we love reading these things here. This one comes in from Canaras on Silver Moon EU from Denmark, entitled Best for World of Warcraft. I'm a relatively new player that started playing World of Warcraft a little over a year ago, and the Starting Zone has been a huge help in navigating what is important in this massive game. Without your podcast, I would have missed a lot of stuff in the game. You guys keep me up to date every week, and I look forward to the next episode. Keep up the great work, and thank you for the great podcast. Well, you're very welcome, Canaras. I appreciate you taking the time to drop us that Denmark 5-star. That means a lot. And man, I am always pumped to see the international reviews come in. Thank you, international community. You count for a lot, and we appreciate you.
Yeah, it's always awesome to hear somebody, from the other side of the planet or whatever, checking out the show, and just the global community around WoW is so awesome. And it's great to hear from a relatively new player,
Yeah.
just a year in the game. I mean, I would still consider that a pretty new player considering how much there is to learn about WoW, and we've been hearing from a lot of new players lately, or a lot of players coming back from really long absences. And those new players do exist, and sometimes we have discussions about, well, should we really hit this point every single week when it comes around or whatever? And every episode of the show is somebody's first episode, and
Yep.
there's always people at different stages of where they're at with experiencing the game and what their goals are. So I think that consistency is important to the show, and to helping people have like some kind of touchstone for like, okay, I want to play WoW, but the game is throwing a ton of stuff at me. Like, what is important, or like what do I not want to miss out on this week? I mean, we take that
Yeah.
really seriously, and we want to highlight that stuff because we want people to have fun with this game the way that we do, and that means there's more people to play with and everything like that. So it's always great to hear. It's super cool to hear from people who are newer to the game, because there is sort of a narrative that people like that don't exist, right? I mean, obviously, WoW is an old game, and it does have kind of a graying player base. I myself am no exception, but there are people checking out the game all the time for the first time. That does happen, and you want to. The game, I don't think, really provides great on ramps necessarily. I think the game does sort of make assumptions about what you know about it already, and so helping people find kind of those on ramps to a play style they enjoy or something they like doing in the game, I think, is a really important part of the show, and making people feel welcome and like a part of the the game itself and the community and the world that a lot of us have been invested in for 20 years now. Like that means a lot. So it's cool to hear.
Yeah. All right, that's going to wrap up episode 638 of The Starting Zone. If you want to check out show notes for this episode or leave us a comment on the show, you can head on over to thestartingzone.com, the official website for the Starting Zone podcast. If you want to contact the show and leave us your feedback or email us a question, you can do that at thestartingzone@gmail.com. You can also reach out to us on Twitter at The Starting Zone, or on Discord. You can join our Discord server. Just go to thestartingzone.com/Discord. And if you want to get your hands on some TSE gear, you can find that over at TeePublic. That's teepublic.com/stores/The Starting Zone. There's often sales happening there. We're 33% off or 20% off, all sorts of things like that for shirts and mugs and stickers and things like that. You can check it all out over there. And Jason, where can folks find you on the internet?
Best place to find me, as always, is over on Twitter. You can find me over there at Shieldwald, and you can also find me on Blue Sky, just Jay Lucas over there. You can find the video channels at twitch.tv/Shieldwald and youtube.com/Shieldwald. They've been dormant for a while. I'm going to get them going at some point. I thought maybe this week I would have, but I've just been super busy and everything, with summertime stuff kicking in. They'll definitely be back for expansion, if not before. I would love to just kind of hang out and do some low-key stuff and sort of get back into the swing, but check out the video channels over there. We'll get something going before too much longer.
Nice. If you're trying to find me, you can find me on Twitter at Spencer_Downey, or over on Blue Sky at SpencerHD, twitch.tv/SpencerHD, or youtube.com/@SpencerHD. And with that, for myself and Jason, I want to say thanks for listening, and jobs done.